So this video is a slight change of pace. I wanted to take a look at a video that was put out the other day by the Law and Crime Network. Now, the main part that I'm interested in is the second half of the video, where she's having a discussion with a retired law enforcement individual who is now apparently working as a private investigator, and he is sharing his perspective on this case based on his professional background. So I found that quite interesting. But rather than jump straight to that, I do want to address the first part of this video, because this is the typical situation of a really large channel grabbing onto a case, not really doing a lot of research, and then putting out some rather painful misinformation. So I wanted to take a look at that before having a look at what this private investigator had to say. Now, before I jump into this content, I probably need to point out that my use of this content is covered under the Fair Use Act, or the Copyright Act of 1976, and that as such, this video is not in any way infringing on anyone's copyright. So with that out of the way, let's jump in and take a look at this video.
This case has captured international attention. How do a 6- and a 4-year-old just disappear for months? Was it random? Was it someone inside the home? Did these two just wander off? All those possibilities are being explored, making their disappearance that much more mysterious. Jack and Lily Sullivan were just the sweetest little children, according to their mom. She posted this on Facebook just last week on October 13th. As a mother, I love my children more than life itself and feel so heartbroken not being able to hold my 2 children, Lily and Jack, kiss them, breathe in their scent, or tuck them into bed, dress them, wake up to their sweet smiling faces. The longing I have for them to come back home to me is a greater feeling than I could ever imagine feeling.
I'm going to skip over the rest of that drivel from Malehya because we know that that's all it is. What they haven't understood here when they were putting together this news article is that this is the one and only time since the 2nd of May that we've heard from Malehya. It has got lies in it and is certainly not heartfelt. It is my very strong belief that the only reason that she wrote this statement is because someone put her in a position where she felt like she had no choice. It is a work of fiction as opposed to being anything factual or anything representing what she really feels. And I do have to say that with this particular story starting with this statement from Malehya, it feels like a bit of a kick in the teeth. But like I said, when you get these big channels, they have researchers who get told, okay, we need you to research this for us. The researchers aren't going to dig deep. They're just going to go look on Facebook, which apparently they did, and look at a few news media articles and come up with what they have. So they've kind of missed the boat a little bit here.
6-year-old Lily Sullivan and her 4-year-old brother Jack have been missing since May of this year. According to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the two were last seen on May 2nd in Nova Scotia. Jack and Lily's mom told police that on that morning, she and her husband were in bed with their baby Meadow.
I try really hard not to come across as negative when I'm dealing with things like this, but it rubs me up the wrong way, something fierce, to hear them referring to Daniel as her husband. He was a boyfriend. They are no longer together. He is a nobody. And yes, like I said, I've acknowledged that they have a time limit in terms of doing their research. So there are limitations on what they can research. But basic facts. You need to check basic facts if you are going to do a story like this. A little bit of quick fact checking would have immediately cleared up the fact that he is not and never was Malehya's husband.
But they could hear Lily and Jack playing in the kitchen. Lily even reportedly peeped her head in multiple times to look in their bedroom. But then suddenly, the kids were gone. Their stepfather Daniel went to check on them, but no sign of them. Their boots were gone, and so was Lily's backpack. On that same day, police got a 911 call that the siblings wandered from their home. Police spent the first week of their disappearance scouring the woods near their home, but still no signs of Jack or Lily. According to a May report by Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, or CBC, police called off the search as they fear the worst.
I just have to pause for a moment and give everyone a bit of breathing space. I don't know about you, but I find it really hard when someone just basically reels off a script with no breathing in between, no sentiment in their voice. I get that they have to fit it within a time limit. I get that they are not emotionally invested in the case. But for us, it is hard to listen when someone is just reeling off facts on the case at record speed without actually adding any commentary of any sort. And yes, I know it's the style of this channel, and I must admit, I tend not to watch this channel. I only watch it when things come up that are of interest to me like this. But this is why I prefer to spend my time watching channels like Justin, like Daphne, people who are emotionally invested in the case and who know what they're talking about and aren't just reeling off a script.
RCMP Staff Sergeant Curtis McKinnon said in a May 7th press conference, "If we thought they were alive right now, we'd still be out there." RCMP confirmed an underwater recovery team searched the lakes, but no evidence was uncovered. Jack and Lily's stepdad, Daniel Martel, believed that the siblings slipped out of the sliding door back when Daniel and the children's mom, Malehya, were in their bedroom with their 1-year-old daughter.
Again, fact-checking is important. Saying that Meadow is 1 when she was, I believe, 16 months old at the time, it shows poor fact-checking skills. Now, I do find it amusing that they're calling her Malehya, but again, if you're covering a case, then the key names in that case, you should probably be actually making sure you can pronounce them. And I know I battle so much myself with place names here when I'm talking about this case. But I genuinely do try. Sounds like here there's no interest in trying. Let's just pronounce it any way we like. That said, on a positive note, when you get a huge channel like this covering this case, suddenly it is getting much greater exposure. And I've seen the typical follow-on effect of other big channels deciding to talk about the case.
Other theories have swirled since. One neighbor reportedly heard a car going back and forth near the home in the middle of the night before they disappeared. The neighbor said his home was elevated from Jack and Lily's home, so he could see the vehicle lights from over the treetops. Court documents viewed by CBC say he said the vehicle left 3 or 4 hours after midnight and into the early hours of the morning. He said the vehicle would drive off in the distance and he could hear it stop and then return. He said it remained in earshot the entire time.
Well, that's got to be a little bit embarrassing, hasn't it? You have on the screen in front of you saying it left 3 or 4 times after midnight. And yet her script, or maybe she just misread it herself, she says it left 3 or 4 hours after midnight. I was going to jump in and criticise their research again, but it seems that their research was correct and they have quoted CBC properly, but she hasn't.
Another neighbor reportedly told investigators on May 17th he heard a vehicle near Highway 289 turn around by railroad tracks near an intersection close to Jack and Lily's home. That neighbor spoke with the other neighbor, saying that the car he saw was Daniel's. But police said there was no evidence like surveillance video, so the witness statements couldn't be proven. In the department's most recent update from October 21st, a spokesperson told the Canadian press that police found, quote, no evidence of any vehicle activity at that time. As such, no driver has been identified, and the presence of a vehicle has not been substantiated as a key element in the investigation.
Now, here's the thing. I do spend a lot of time clarifying misinformation when other channels have misinterpreted something or have put out misinformation. But when you have a huge channel like this that is putting out misinformation, it makes it so hard. Because people are going to get the wrong end of the stick, and they do. So first of all, again, it goes back to the lack of adequate research. So there's no connection made here when they talk about Highway 289. They don't make the connection here that that is actually Gairloch Road. Because apparently in doing their research they actually haven't identified Gairloch Road at all. They also made the mistake of claiming that Justin told Brad that the car was Daniel's, which is not the case. So another mistake. And then in terms of the vehicle and saying, well, it can't be proven, the statement that they are referring to specifically references video footage, camera footage. They're not discounting these witness statements and saying they're wrong. They're just saying that they haven't found any camera footage in the area that can support these claims, which is not surprising given where the area is. So some of it is about not adequately researching, not taking your research a little bit further, and some of it is about misinterpreting what has been written in articles because you've jumped on a quote and left out a crucial part of that quote. Although I guess to be fair, you have to consider that after 6 months, we are so very familiar with the little nuances in the statements from RCMP. So we're able to figure out exactly what it is they are saying. Whereas it looks like their researchers here are just doing a quick scan of articles, maybe just one article, and not really getting the full information. And, you know, when it comes to cases like this, when you're researching, it shouldn't just be looking at 2 or 3 articles. And while CBC certainly do have the most extensive coverage, you need to be looking at multiple sources when you are researching a case. Because one media outlet might be doing it from their own angle. They also might misinterpret information or leave bits of information out. And whether it was a time thing or just a couldn't be bothered thing, but if there are documents available, then you should also be trying to access them and look at what is actually in the documents as opposed to relying what someone else is saying that they read in the documents. That's how you get the Chinese whispers thing going on. Because already they've taken information that CBC have shared from the documents and they've got it wrong. The next person might look at their article, their news story here, and misinterpret theirs, and then it just goes in a spiral. Okay, I will try harder to look for some positives here.
Earlier this month, the Northeast Nova RCMP Major Crimes Unit took their search up a notch. This is what they had to say in their October 8th update. In September, Inspector Luke Reddy and his police dog Narc, as well as Sergeant Dave Whalen and his police dog Kit, searched for Lily and Jack in Lansdowne Station, covering a total of 40 kilometers. The team specially trained in detecting human remains searched at the property from which the children went missing, along the pipeline and intersecting trails, and in an area where a pink blanket was previously found, all locations where there was the highest probability of finding the children. However, the teams did not locate any remains. The dogs are highly trained to detect and indicate the scent of human remains. Therefore, if the dogs did not alert their handlers, it suggests dogs were never in the presence of human remains odor.
So, for people who may not have seen my previous videos discussing this statement from the RCMP, I just want to point out that in this statement that was released, They have not said that the dogs did not identify a scent anywhere. All they said was that the dogs failed to locate any remains. And then they said if the dogs did not alert to a scent, that suggests that they weren't in the presence of any odours. It's not saying that they did not alert to any scents. It's only saying if they didn't alert to any scents, this would be the situation. They're carefully sidestepping the fact that part of the role of the dogs is to identify scents in locations where something may have occurred. So, for example, with the Maddie Soto case, one of the dogs alerted to the wheel arch of Jennifer Soto's car. That doesn't mean that Maddie was up in the wheel arch. That means that Stefan must have been a secondary transfer, in my opinion, and that he must have actually touched that wheel arch at some point in time, having previously been with Maddie after she was deceased. And yes, given how tight-lipped they are with this case, if the dogs had alerted to the presence of an odour, they're not going to tell us.
However, this does not definitively rule out the presence of remains in the areas that were searched. It means either the odor is there and couldn't be detected, or the odor isn't there.
Every time I hear this statement, it cracks me up because it is so redundant. It is almost verging on being an oxymoron. This doesn't definitively rule out the presence of remains. It means either the odour is there and couldn't be detected, or the odour isn't there. Well, yeah, if a dog doesn't alert in a location, then you've only got those two possibilities. So why even say this? Sounds like an attempt to over-explain. Anyway, moving on.
According to Staff Sergeant Rob McCannon, the acting officer in charge, he said the investigation is still ongoing. In a statement saying, each piece of information includes the results from the search teams, helps inform our next steps. With support from agencies across Canada, the investigative team is working to validate or eliminate leads and follow the evidence wherever it takes us. At this stage, and as we said all along, we're considering all possibilities. We'll keep going until we determine with certainty the circumstances of the children's disappearance and their found.
I so look forward to the day when we get a statement from the RCMP that is more than just a bunch of hollow words that are intended to obfuscate, leave us no wiser than we were before we actually read the statement. I get that this is the approach that the RCMP takes, but the irony here is that they have acknowledged the value of true crime channels, the value of social media, and yet they're not trying to adapt their policies to make the most of that. You know, a little bit more information given out could actually make a huge difference in terms of speeding up their investigation. Maybe it won't, but maybe it could.
Lily and Jack's mom, Malehya, is still urging for help to find them. She wrote this to the Find Lily and Jack Sullivan Facebook page. To know the sweet boy will turn 5 years old next week is devastating. Jack Sullivan still remains missing alongside his big sister Lily Mae Sullivan, and they both need to be found. 178 days missing. They are both beyond missed. A birthday should be filled with balloons, cake and presents, music, celebration, and fun. But this year it'll be filled with such heartache. Please note a candlelight vigil will take place for Jack's 5th birthday on Wednesday, 29th October 2025 at Stellarton RCMP Detachment. The vigil will be a quiet, respectful moment for the community to come together for Jack and Lily.
Okay, for starters, I'm pretty certain that that please note bit was not written by Malehya, but was probably put in by the admin of whichever page it was that posted that statement. And I actually feel really angry seeing that statement. Now, I actually didn't see it anywhere on Facebook because while I don't actually comment in these pages. I may well have done so had I seen that, because that is disgusting. She's not spoken out for her children at all, and now she makes this little statement a week before Jack's birthday. You could make a difference, Malehya. You could actually speak out for your children and bring them home. Because I have no doubt that you know what happened to your children. Maybe you don't know where they are, but if you tell the RCMP what happened to your children, maybe then they will have enough to allow them to ask the people who do know where your children are. I also want to point out that the bit with saying how many days it is, I am willing to bet that she didn't figure that one out for herself. I'm willing to bet that she has basically looked at a post by Chelsea or by Belinda and just copied that and gone, okay, well, Chelsea said it's been 178 days. She knows because she's actually paying attention to the case and she's actually being present for Jack and Lily, so she must be right. Now, I could sit here and do a major analysis of what Malehya said there, but that's for another video, and I also would like to try and find the original of that on Facebook to find out just how much of it was said by Malehya. If you have seen the original, if you know which Facebook page it is on, give me a holler. Even better, if you happen to have a screenshot of that, send it my way. But I do have to say here that anything from Malehya I don't consider as heartfelt in any way whatsoever, because she's been in hiding for the last 6 months. When have we heard from her? Well, we heard from her when there was a GoFundMe going on because she wanted that money. And then we have this statement from Please Bring Me Home. And then the next thing we know is she's once again making accusations against Belinda and her fake lawyer, who I'm pretty certain is actually a real lawyer. And then supposedly this statement, which I've not seen, but I will be going and having a look for it. And I can appreciate that if you are looking at this story and you know nothing about it, then you probably would think, well, the first person we need to be looking at is the mother, in terms of people pleading for the children. Well, they got it so wrong here, didn't they? They would have done so much better to have dug a little bit deeper, done a bit of research, and to actually quote Belinda here, because then that would have been heartfelt.
I'm joined now by private investigator Ashton Pack. Ashton, thank you so much for joining me. Now, Jack and Lily Sullivan have been missing for 6 months now. Where do you think the search goes from here? I mean, they're just 4 and 6 years old.
Yeah, it's a really tough case, and my heart breaks for these children. And unfortunately, after almost a quarter century in law enforcement before I retired, the cynic in me unfortunately feels those children. I'm just afraid they're no longer alive.
How refreshing is it to hear from someone who claims to have a background in law enforcement, and I believe him, and is actually not wide-eyed and all admiring of one or two of the parents. Someone who sees it as it is and calls it as it is. And this is just the precursor. He continues to say a lot of really valid things, which is why I wanted to share this with you. I do have to comment though, I find it a little bit unsettling. I think this guy must have been a detective, because the entire time throughout this interview, he has the detective face going. You do not see him crack a smile that I recall seeing. But it seems like from 20-something years in his role, his demeanour has just become set in stone. And like I said, based on his demeanour, I would say this guy was a detective. And I think if he were interrogating me, I would either shut down or give him all the answers.
I hope they are. I really hope that the RCMP up in Canada can really bring them home. There's always the possibility that they are still alive and out there, but as time goes on, we just understand from previous cases and the nature of these kind of incidents that the longer the time frame extends from the time that they were reported missing, it's just the odds of them coming home alive just increasingly shrink. So my heart breaks for those kids.
Honestly, based on what he's saying here, I think he's already got the measure of this case without digging too much in. He's saying how it would be lovely if they were able to bring them home, but he's like, based on other cases like this, I mean, he could spit it out and say what he's thinking, but we know what he's thinking. He's clearly done enough research before his interview to really figure this one out and know exactly where this case is headed. I think the way he's trying to be very diplomatic says to me that he was probably someone in a command position, possibly in his job in law enforcement, because he certainly knows how to talk the talk. But you will note that he did a similar thing to what the RCMP have done, and he doesn't say my heart breaks for the parents. He says my heart breaks for the kids. Or for those kids, sorry. So he's not even offering sympathy here for the parents. He's saying his heart breaks for those kids. When someone says my heart breaks for those kids, I think we know what their thoughts are on the case.
Yeah, and my heart does too, because I mean, they're just 6 and 4 years old. I can't emphasize that enough. And my thought also goes to their stepfather's kind of reaction in a way about what's kind of happened to Jack and Lily, that they wandered out of the home. Their boots were gone, Lily's backpack was gone. But do you buy that with what we know right now?
Well, I mean, it's a rural part of Canada. I not exactly a snowy season in Canada. Maybe it was a nice day for the kids to go outside. But as a father myself who raised, 3 children from very young ages on, you just kind of know where your kids are at. So I just think it's a kind of an odd statement to say that they just wandered off and nobody knew about it.
He thinks like a detective too, pointing out that this is May. Now, he's admitted here he doesn't know exactly what the weather was like, but let's fill in the gaps here. The overnight temperature from the 1st of May through to the 2nd was 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. Now, I can't remember which it was because I looked at the overnight temperature for 1st to the 2nd and the overnight temperature from 2nd to the 3rd. I think the overnight temperature on the 1st to the 2nd was a little bit colder, but we know that sunrise was around 6:30 in the morning. That means that around 8:30, which is when allegedly they wandered off out of the house, it still would have been damn freezing out there. There were probably areas of the property where the sun hadn't actually reached it yet above the trees. It was quite likely overcast because we know that it rained later in the day. So it would have been fecking freezing that morning. Certainly too cold for 2 little kids to want to go outside and play, and too cold for them to just go for a bit of a wander. I don't know why she said that her heart goes to the stepfather when she then turned around and essentially said there's something hinky about this case.
It's a possibility. I don't know if it's a probability of what's the actual truth.
And what do you think the probability is that they were abducted?
There's a chance that they were abducted. I mean, you can't rule that out right now. I know RCMP is treating it as a missing persons case. That might just be a strategic move for Canadian law enforcement, where the rules might be a little different, keeping it non-criminal at this point to kind of maybe bypass some rules and procedures that they have in their court system. I'm not really sure on that, and I'm no expert in Canadian law, but
Mhm.
at this point, I feel like, the longer we get away from the time of missing, the more chances that there's some kind of foul play going on here. Is an abduction a possibility? Some kind of a trafficking incident? Absolutely, it's a possibility.
I'd really love to hear this guy's perspective after watching a few of Daniel Martel's interviews and after reading all the different media releases from the RCMP, because they made it pretty damn clear from very, very early on that they did not believe it was an abduction. They have said that there has been no evidence of an abduction, and they have maintained that. And in fact, there was a recent news article where they doubled down on that and said they do not believe that there was an abduction. They have essentially ruled that out. So I don't know if this guy's just trying to be diplomatic, but I disagree with him in terms of, I know that with cases like this, you can't always rule out an abduction. You just have to look at the Elizabeth Smart case. But in this instance, when we have 3 individuals who are acting guilty as individuals who can't get their stories straight, who can't coordinate their stories, then it's pretty clear this is not an abduction. To be honest though, I think he stopped himself from saying what he was truly thinking, because he started talking about it being in a rural area and how far out it is, that sort of thing. And in terms of looking at the victim risk for these children, it is infinitesimal. First of all, abductions of multiple children, 2 or more, are so rare unless it is a situation where they have been abducted by a non-custodial parent. Usually that occurs at the end of a visitation. When you add into that the fact that this is a rural area with a backyard that is not visible from the road, with children who should have been on the school bus, then that diminishes the possibility even further. We know from the documents that the RCMP went out of their way to rule out the possibility of abduction by people familiar with the children. And the thing is, a huge, huge percentage of abductions are people who already know the children. Stranger abductions are a rarity. And when you add in all the other low risk factors to children in a rural area, in a backyard that's not visible from the road, on a day when they should have been at school, then you are talking at a possibility that is in decimal percentages. It wouldn't even be a 1% possibility.
So, Ashton, I'm also curious your thoughts on why the cadaver dogs haven't been able to find any traces of human remains.
Well, cadaver dogs are good at doing one thing, finding human remains. And if the human remains aren't there, then that checks that box. I mean, you can bring in cadaver dogs early, and I think that was a very wise move because God forbid these kids got out and were exposed to the elements. I mean, again, I don't know what the weather was like in May in Nova Scotia, but you are pretty far above up in the northern hemisphere. So if there was some kind of they wandered off and God forbid something happened to them or they passed in the elements, then the cadaver dogs would have been able to absolutely ping on that scent of those children that were missing.
Okay, so yeah, he's only looking at it from one angle there. And obviously, when you read that statement from RCMP and you don't take the time to really look at what they're saying, particularly if you haven't got the context of reading all their previous releases, then yes, you may think that the dogs have just come up with nothing, come out empty-handed. whereas they never said the dogs did not alert to the scent of decomposition. They just said the dogs did not find any remains. But he is right. We can be pretty confident that the children did not wander off into the woods. We were confident beforehand, but the fact that the dogs have done that 40-kilometre area around the house tells us that if there were actual remains there, they would have been found, because they have made it really clear that the dogs did not find remains. They have not made it clear that the dogs didn't alert, but they have made it clear the dogs did not find remains. To me, that says they are clear, they are quite certain now that the children did not wander off into the woods. And I need to backtrack a bit, because I realised I bypassed the bit where he was talking about possibility of abduction and that they're calling it a missing persons case, and that maybe they're doing it to bypass rules and procedures, which is what I've been saying all along in terms of why it is still being described as a missing persons case, because that is precisely what they are doing. Instead of having to come up with a application for a warrant where they've got to create probable cause, all they have to say is this information could help us with finding the children. There's far less onus on them to prove that they need those documents, or to prove that they need the data from those phones or something. They don't really need to prove anything more than the fact that there is a possibility that if we have this information, this will help us progress our case and get closer to finding these missing children. So he is spot on. He is 100% spot on with what he's saying here about them being smart and using the description of the case to bypass rules and procedures. Because if they were investigating this as a criminal case, then that really does limit what they can access without establishing solid probable cause. And when you're looking at a nobody case, it is harder to establish probable cause.
And how difficult is it to search like a very rural and wooded area as it is kind of near where Jack and Lily were living around, or still kind of living around this time? But in terms of just searching for them in this very rural area, what is it like to kind of do that?
Yeah, that area, most of my law enforcement career was in the Mojave Desert here in Las Vegas. But yeah, I was law enforcement in a Lake Tahoe area where it was very wooded and very dense. And yeah, those searches, we had to conduct several. And it's, that is such a heavily wooded area that without, utilizing multiple air assets, potential drone technology, volunteers, people who could come in and set up that grid search and start to conduct a massive search. Again, these are 4 and 5-year-old children, 6-year-old children. How far can they really get in all reality without a neighbor seeing something, passing motorist spotting something happening? This doesn't really sit well with me. But yeah, the grid searches in those kinds of areas, very difficult, because it is just so heavily wooded, massive amounts of wildlife up there, from predators to just everyday, animals that roam that area. So it's a tough one up there.
Okay, I've got to say this for those other people who followed the Kylie Rodney case as closely as I did. I'm not going to hold it against him that he was law enforcement in the Lake Tahoe area. I know there is corruption in law enforcement in that area, but the fact that he got out suggests to me that maybe he got out because he saw the corruption and decided to go elsewhere. Because it certainly seems to be the pattern that those people who don't buy into the corruption are the ones that leave, as opposed to the ones that buy into it or are part of it. They're the ones who get promoted and become sheriff. But it is good to have someone bring that perspective, because yes, that area around Lake Tahoe is heavily wooded. The difference, however, is that this area around Lansdowne Station has all the storm damage. So it's even worse than what he's thinking of in his mind. So for him to be essentially saying here it seems unlikely that they've wandered off and not been found. Because when you read between the lines, that is what he's saying here. He's trying to be very diplomatic. He's trying to not sound like he's jumping to conclusions, but he is essentially saying here that he believes that they wouldn't have gone far in that sort of terrain and that they would have been found. And here's where it's a shame that they didn't adequately research the case beforehand, because my question for this detective or investigator would be, what are your thoughts on them basically scaling back the search after only 6 days? Because I think he could give us quite an enlightening answer. It's something that I have stood by since the beginning. The fact that they brought in major crimes on day 2 and scaled back the search on day 6, to me that is like a neon sign telling us exactly what direction they are headed with this case.
That's what makes this case all that more mysterious. And just going back to what you had mentioned just about the neighbors possibly seeing or even hearing things, I believe like 2 neighbors claim that they heard a car going back and forth around the time that they disappeared, but police say that they were unable to verify that. What are your thoughts on that, especially since we're in 2025, especially since we have a lot of digital evidence like surveillance video, all of that sort, but it seems like from what police are saying, this particular area didn't have a lot of video surveillance footage.
Yeah, this is a very rural part of the world. There is not like in cities where we have cameras on every corner, multiple neighbors with multiple Ring or home video surveillance systems. I personally think that the it's just a tough play. Eyewitness testimony. You have a neighbor who says, "I thought I heard a car." How reliable can we really treat that? We've seen time and time again the science behind eyewitness testimony. And this is when people say they are watching it firsthand, where it can be, unreliable in a court of law. What did I hear last night at 2 o'clock in the morning when I was up, checking the doors? I don't know what I heard. I can't really, the brain will fill in some gaps. Sometimes people think they hear things and all of a sudden it becomes true in their mind.
Okay, but having lived in a rural area where the entire town pretty much rolls up at 7 p.m. and that's it, you do notice vehicles late at night because it is a sound that you don't normally hear in an area like that, because people aren't going out doing late night shopping. People aren't going out night clubbing or going out to visit relatives, because you have to travel further to do those things. So all those activities become daytime activities, because otherwise at night time you might be travelling home 40 minutes late at night when there are animals on the road. Now I'm going with Australia in terms of the animals on the road, but I've heard that Canada is not so dissimilar. I mean, here in Australia, if you live in a rural area and you have to do a lot of driving at night, sooner or later you're going to have a run-in with a roo or a wallaby, and it's not fun. So, a lot of us do try to minimise the amount of time that we spend travelling at night. And if you are in a rural area where maybe the closest thing is like 40 minutes away, like I said, you end up doing these things through the day. There's no corner shop that you're going to dash down to at 8 o'clock at night. anything that you want to go to is some distance away. So if these neighbours are saying that they heard or saw vehicles, yes, the brain may fill in gaps. And I actually said that in terms of people are very set on, this is the route that Justin heard the car go along. This must be the exact route. But like I said, the brain fills in the gaps. So we don't know if that car did drive along 289 or if it was driving parallel to 289, for example, up behind the property on Gerlock Road, up along where the pipeline is. We still don't know Justin's location, which also makes it harder to judge things. But so he's right in terms of, yes, the brain does fill in the gaps. But I strongly disagree. As someone who has lived in a rural area, you hear every vehicle that goes along the road late at night. And you sure as heck hear any vehicles that are driving along the road between like midnight and 5 a.m. because it's such a rarity. And yes, you are going to notice headlights because when there's so little traffic through the night, then it catches your attention. I mean, where I lived, because it was a rural area, there were a lot of people that used to go spotlighting late at night. And yes, if someone was driving on a hill several kilometres away late at night, if that was within your sight range, you were going to notice it. And it's also important to acknowledge here that we have two witnesses whose statements basically corroborate each other. And before Brad came out and made his statement, Justin had approached the RCMP on day one, asking to speak to someone about vehicles travelling along the road. So you can't even turn around and claim, as someone did, that Justin was swayed by Brad and made it up because Brad asked him to do so, which is ridiculous. But yeah, when you have two witnesses whose statements fit so closely, then yeah, you've got to pay attention.
At this point in the investigation, I would think that law enforcement is now going to be, they're really going to be relying heavily on the computers, the phones of the stepdad, the mom, and the people in that house. What kind of digital footprint did they have? What was their Google search looking like? And these are all things that will be happening behind the scenes by the investigators. And of course, none of that will be made public because they have to maintain the integrity of this criminal investigation.
And we know that they have got all that digital forensics. So he's not wrong here. Digital forensics are so important. And while on paper it might look like they don't have much, you can bet that they have a heck of a lot more than what we realise.
Yeah, which makes it all the more tough because I know that people just want the answers, right? And I know that police are looking into bank records, video surveillance where they can find it, GPS tracking, text messages. And I know that's going to be very important in a case like this, but there are still no new leads after 6 months. Are you pretty surprised by that?
Yeah, that's pretty shocking because you would usually be able to get a search warrant for the home, the computers, the digital devices, even the cars. The cars today all have computers in them. Everything is downloadable, everything can be extracted, and its data can be analyzed by law enforcement. So I am pretty surprised that there's been no real advancements in this case.
It seems to be a major assumption that is being made here, that there are no real advancements in this case. We don't know everything that's going on behind the scenes. We don't know if there's been new tips gone through or new evidence that's been discovered as a result of new tips. Because the RCMP are playing it so close to the chest. We also don't know what the results are of the digital forensics. What he was saying about the vehicle forensics is so spot on. There is a video that I did a while back, and I will link it below, where I go into great detail about vehicle forensics and what they can actually discover through that avenue. And even though the cell service in the area is patchy, there is at least enough for them to identify movement on phones. But not only that, when they downloaded those phones, then they would have had every little bit of GPS information from those phones. The phones don't need to be connected to a network to map their location. That's in there, in the phones. So every single location that Malehya's phone and Daniel's phone went to will be mapped. We've only seen a handful of documents, but there is so much more. When you look at the names of the documents, we're up to maybe document 20, if that, and yet the numbering on that document from July is, I believe, 117. That shows you just how much more there is that's going on in the background. Over those first days of the search, they had upwards of 4 drones in the air. I've kind of lost count while I've been going through all the dispatch audio, but there were at least 6 drones in the first couple of days, plus helicopters. You can bet that amongst the footage from those drones and helicopters, they have footage of Daniel's movement. Because I think his movements on the Friday are important. We know he wasn't out searching, so what was he actually doing? And I'm pretty certain when you look at the number of images and the hours of video footage that they have from the search, from the drones and from the helicopters, that they have put together a really comprehensive map of Daniel's movements on the Friday and the Saturday.
Yeah, and both Lily and Jack's mom and their stepfather have reportedly been cooperating with police. But in your opinion, and I hate to kind of pose this question to you like this, do you think that they had anything to do with their disappearance? I know it's easy for true crime watchers and people who are kind of, in the police world to kind of believe that something inside the house might have been the motive here. But what do you think?
Well, I learned one thing in my time as a law enforcement officer is just you never assume because you can think it's the stepdad, you can think it's this, it's that, it's human trafficking, some wolves got the kid. You just don't know until you run the investigation as hard as you can run it, as fast as you can run it while maintaining integrity of the case. I have gone into cases in my lifetime, even now in my private investigation work with clients. I'm sometimes so surprised with what I end up finding to what we thought we were going to find. So I just never want to assume that. Plus, it just doesn't maintain integrity of the case to make a presumption. Let these people have their presumptions of innocence. I know there's a ton of red flags, but sometimes, we've seen red flags. If there's red flags and we think that there's something not right, let the law enforcement officers put the pieces together. You can have the information right, or you can have it right now, but you can never have both.
I always become a little bit self-conscious when it comes to analysing body language of someone who is in law enforcement, someone who is on the right side of the law. It feels a little bit wrong, but I just want to point out that while she was asking him that question, his eyes were darting left to right, flat out, and you saw him swallow as he was comprehending what she was saying. He was thinking really hard as to how to answer this question. Now, that to me says that he was thinking really hard about how to be diplomatic. I believe that he has looked closely enough at this case to be totally onto what's going on here. And he does all the... This confirms to me that he was definitely a detective when he was working in law enforcement, from the way he is talking. But at the same time, he's being so very diplomatic, which is a little bit frustrating, because I would love to hear someone with his sort of experience just spit it out and say, oh yeah, heck, they look guilty. But he's trying to be diplomatic here. He's trying to say, well, you know, there's red flags, but we don't want to make assumptions and compromise the case. Meaning that when he's looking at it from the perception of someone who understands the inner workings of these sorts of cases, he doesn't want to say something where he's giving us information on the inner workings that is actually going to compromise this particular case. And I've heard other law enforcement do this the same as well. There seems to be a code amongst former law enforcement that basically, unless they have seen law enforcement really screw up, and then they're going to speak about it because it reflects on their profession, unless that happens, then they are going to tread carefully and not damage other people's cases. But reading between the lines here, I do think that he's looking at this case and thinking, yeah, this is shady. He's several times come close to basically saying, you know, this is dodgy AF. But then he backs away from it and goes into diplomacy mode. But I love that quote. You can have the information right, or you can have it right now. Which is what a lot of us have been saying now for quite some time. We want this case to be resolved, but we want justice for Lily and Jack. And if that means waiting while the RCMP put together a airtight case, then that's what needs to happen. They are telling us that it is an ongoing investigation. They are telling us that they are still pedal to the metal with this. That says to me that they are doing their very best to dot their I's and cross their T's. And that tells me that there is a solid case being built here. Because 6 months in, to be being told still that they are actively working this case, that's a positive. Sometimes it does take a lot of time to build a case that is strong enough for charges to stick. So yes, you can have the information right, or you can have it right now.
Right, exactly. And I know that it's easy to jump to conclusions, and I hope that, you know, Jack and Lily are able to make it very home safe, and I would hate to think that something terrible had happened to them. But again, no arrests have been made. The parents have not been named as suspects or anything like that, so we'll have to wait to see how this continues to play out. Ashton Pack, I want to thank you so much for your time and your insight into this case. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Have a great day.
So on one hand, it felt like a bit of a soft video in terms of nobody was really trying to hit hard with looking at what the truth is. But at the same time, I think he did give some valuable insights. And my sense from watching him, I'm not going to go through and do a speech analysis or anything on this guy, but from my takeaway from everything that I observed in what he was saying, and from observing body language in some instances is that he also thinks this is a little bit on the nose. I do feel that it was worth looking at, and I do feel that it was worth commenting on. So on that note, thanks for watching. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. And also, of course, please hit that like button, get these videos out there into the algorithm. And please leave a comment below. I'm curious to know your thoughts on what this investigator was saying. And just your thoughts on this video that we just looked at. So on that note, thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.